Hi everyone, I'm Tom Wild from ProWritingAid. Thank you for joining us for another session in the Ask a Book Doctor series. As usual, my guest for tonight is Sally OJ. How are you doing, Sally?
Doing very well tonight, Tom, thanks.
Good, good, good. Now tonight, Sally. Oh, I'm cutting across you, Sal, sorry.
So it's my fault. Great to see everybody again.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it? We've had so many people putting welcome messages in chat. It's great. We've actually done this session before, Sally. We've run a session on Show Don't Tell. In fact, it was the first of our Ask a Book Doctor series back in May or June. I can't remember which. But as newbies to webinars, we had a few audio issues, a few technical problems. And so for our audience, we thought we'd run the session again, and we've changed it slightly. And one of the reasons for running it again is because Show Don't Tell it is such an important point, and it's a conversation or a writing tip that all new writers and experienced writers will have heard about. And I just wanted to start off, Sal, I'm going to chuck it over to you. So can you define for us what is showing and what is telling?
Well, first of all, I want to say the reason it was the first session that we did originally was because it is the one thing that everybody wants to know. So what is showing and what is telling, you ask me? Well, telling is when you say something as if it was in a script. So you say, he walked into the room, he felt bad, no one was talking to him. That's telling. Usually a little bit more detail than that because it's not a script. Showing is Brad didn't know what to do. He was standing in the corner of the room with a drink in his hand. No one seemed to be taking any notice. He didn't know how he was going to get through the evening. Now, that was terrible. That was just off the top of my head. But you see the basic difference. So the thing with showing rather than telling, the thing that we want to do is to make giant hands, is to make the reader feel as if they are in the story with the protagonist, that they're experiencing the story through the character's own feelings, own responses, own actions, and not through the writer's summary of that. So in other words, you want your reader to be standing next to your character in this scene. And there's this quote that I always run out when I'm talking about Show Don't Tell, which is from Chekhov. Very well-known quote. Many people here may know it already. And really, I always say as a joke, this is all you need to know about Show Don't Tell. I don't have to say anything else, but I wish it was that simple. And the quote is this: "Don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light on broken glass."
Yeah, it's a great quote, isn't it? It's one we've used before, and I'm sure many of our listeners will be familiar with. So how in that list of topics that you work on with your writers, where does this rank? 1 to 5? Is it?
Well, I mean, I suppose plot would be number one. You can be brilliant at showing and not telling. If you haven't got a good plot, you're lost. But in terms of problems, in terms of things that it's really difficult to get and fix, all of the things we're talking about in these seminars are problems that people have, common problems that people have. But Show Don't Tell is the one that you can read about and watch videos about and read about again and still not quite understand what the problem is. And that's what makes it. It's actually, once you get it, it's really easy to fix. It's the getting it that's the problem. And I've worked with so many authors who've not been able to get it and not been able to get it. And then somehow we've hit on the thing that makes them get it, and it's not just a light bulb moment, it's fireworks and angels singing and all of the rest of it.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
No, go on, Sal, sorry.
Well, I was going to say one example that always sticks in my head is a writer who'd written it was set in India. his book, and it wasn't half bad, the book actually. And he said, I walked through the market to get to, wherever he was going, and or John walked through the market to get, but the whole book was like this. It wasn't just that one scene. So, but I use this market scene to say, so John's European, it's his first day in India, he's walking through the market, he's got to stop for a cow to cross the road, he's smelling all these smells, there's all these bright colors of the vegetables in the market, he can smell the spices, he can smell the cow dung, there's going to be flies, and for some reason, I'd been trying to explain this to him for ages, for some reason that putting us there walking through the market, and it was the cow crossing the road that did it for him. That's what he got. And in the end, he only wrote a paragraph or two. You don't need to go overboard. And that cow crossing the road is what some people might know this expression. It's hold on a minute, I just want to see if I had a better example, but I don't think I do. No. So for him, it was the cow crossing the road is what is called the telling detail. Some people might know this expression, and if you read about show don't tell, you'll sometimes read about the telling detail, and that was the thing that put us undoubtedly in a marketplace in India where people stop to let cows cross the road.
Yeah.
And that's what you're looking for really with show don't tell. It's great to put, we'll talk more about how you want all the senses and so on, but it often, if you can hone it down to one or two or three things in a scene which really bring us in there, that's what you're looking for.
I love that that story about when people get it. And in fact, there are a couple of blog posts on the ProWritingAid site about show don't tell, and one of them I'll post a link in a minute actually, but one of them talks about using a camera technique. So to show you look at the scene as if you're looking at it from a camera's perspective, looking at it through the camera lens, and describe the scene, and it's much easier to think about how you would show it. And so obviously with the camera it's slightly different because it's not wholly accurate because a camera wouldn't pick up smells and sounds, but it helps some people understand how you might show rather than tell. A couple of things I wanted to pick up on, Sal. One is actually it's a question for our listeners, because I'm sure many of them have been through that kind of that moment when they've suddenly got what showing rather than telling is. So I'm interested to hear that. Feel free to share your experience in chat if that's the case. The other is going to dive straight in with a question here, and I'm not sure who it's from, but it really resonates with something else I've read, which is about when you're first drafting. So when you're going into your first draft, is it worth telling and editing to show later? And this is something I've read in a few places. What do you recommend, Sal?
So I think in a lot of these sessions we've talked about first drafts, and the key thing with the first draft is just to get everything out of your head and onto the page. It's not going to be the finished book. It's not going to be perfect in any way. It's going to need loads of work, and the important thing is to get stuff out, get it down. So in that sense, as with many other of the things we're talking about, it's not important actually to get it in. You're just going to have quite a bit of work going back to do it. But once you understand the principle, the work isn't hard. Once you understand the principle, the work is not hard at all. You just look and you say, oops, I've just, that reads like a script. There's nothing there. There's no involvement there. And obviously, the other thing that's very important to say is you can't do this all the time. Obviously, right. Sometimes you're going to say, George walked into the room. That you can't, it would be a complete overload and be awful.
So as a writer, how do you before you've engaged an editor or a book doctor, how do you recognize whether you're doing the right thing? How do you recognize if you've got a problem with this?
Well, often you don't, and that in itself is a problem. So I think awareness is the first thing. I think people who want to learn to write, or everybody here is a student. All authors, if they're any good, continue to be students and continue to hone their craft. I'm talking about published authors as well. You never stop learning. So people will have been aware. I think most people here will have certainly heard from the first thing you read about or hear about is showing rather than telling.
Yeah.
If I'm just trying to think how you can find out for yourself if you're doing it. I think it is a case of thinking, am I bringing the reader into this scene?
Yeah.
Am I bringing the reader into the story? Will the reader feel as if they're walking next to my characters? That's one way of doing it.
Yeah, and I keep coming back to that point that you make about, yes, being beside the character. And so, in fact, Patricia mentions in chat, she said is writing descriptive sentences the same as show don't tell, and I think this is probably a common question. It's not just about description, is it?
No, it's sort of Venn diagrams with description, obviously. Writing descriptive sentences is great as long as you obviously, and it's very good unless you tip over into purple prose, but that's, I always say get it out first and then you can cut it back. But it's not exactly about description, it's about presence. So it comes back again to this telling detail. So, if you're walking into your great aunt's house, if your character is walking into her great aunt's house and as soon as she goes through the door, she can smell wet dog, then we know a great deal about the great aunt, even before we know anything else. So we don't necessarily need to know at that point the color of the wallpaper. What we showing rather than telling is giving us the moment that we will be able to connect to and think, yes. So rather than saying my aunt was 75 and she had 3 old dogs and she wasn't very good at taking care of them because she was older, you walk into the house and you smell wet dog, boom, you're there. It's that kind of thing. So of course it is description, but it's not description.
Yes. And I thought when we talked about this the other day in kind of preparation for tonight, to this talk, I mentioned I see it as almost as different. It's not, but in my head I see it almost as a difference between almost 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional. It's being in the scene, isn't it, from a reader's perspective? And I can see this conversations going on in chat. I think Marv has probably kicked this one off with saying one thing he finds helpful is to think about the scene or moment in terms of the 5 senses. You can't always use all 5, but having the palette in front of my mind reminds me to show what's happening. And I think that's a great point.
This is something I tell people all the time, because I think we talked about this last time. When we were talking about description, people remember visual description always, and they can be very good at that. But if you use all 5 senses, smell comes second. People think, oh yes, I must put some smells in there. But touch can be really evocative. Sound, obviously, if somebody wakes up, if your character wakes up in the morning and they can hear the seagulls, you know exactly where you are, and there's a certain quality of light coming through the curtains. So, but all 5 senses, it's absolutely true. If you can not cram into every paragraph, not cram into every example, but think of ways so that the reader can make an association without even having to think about it.
Yeah. Right, so if you don't mind, I'm going to go straight into a few questions because they're really piling up here. So if that's okay, Bonnie has asked, and this is an interesting point because we've talked about screenplays and scripts. Bonnie said, I prefer skits / plays to writing stories. Will writing it as a story first be worth the effort? But they're very different things, right?
I am so sorry, I don't quite understand the question. Do you mean will writing it as a story first inform the play? Is that what you're asking, or the skit?
Great, that's a great question. I think that's probably the case, but we can wait for
Um,
Bonnie.
yes, it kind of course it will. You know, one of the things when we talk about characterization, I always say, you know, we did characterization.
Yeah.
And I said, you know, make a list, make a page about each character. And even if you don't put it in the book, everything that you make on that page, even if you don't put it in the book, it's going to inform the writing of the character. So if you write down that he collects bottle tops and he wears contact lenses and he's got a weak bladder, even if you don't put all that into the book, it's going to inform the way you write the character. And it's the same with this question. Yes, the more fully rounded something is for you, it will inform the play. Having said that, they are two very different disciplines, completely different disciplines. You know, people can be extremely good at one and not very good at all at the other. And some people, of course, can do both really well, but they don't necessarily inform each other. So, but yes, I would stick my neck out and say it would make a difference. Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, Grace has asked, do you need to anchor the showing with the character's emotion? What is the best way to show the emotion rather than tell?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And yeah, the simple answer is yes. I mean, it depends on the scene. It depends obviously on what's going on. But you do, you know, very often I'll read, Sarah was very upset. She'd never felt so bad in her life. It was awful. You know, well, okay, poor Sarah. But if you have Sarah suddenly felt as if she couldn't breathe, you know, I'm just making this up, but you know, her palms were wet. Or, you know, if you bring us in with an emotional response, and much better than that, and much more subtle than that, then of course that's going to make a tremendous difference. And in fact, it was on my list to talk about, so I don't have to do that now. But yes, an excellent question, and definitely.
So Sal, it's purely coincidence that the example you use uses Sarah. One of the examples in the blog posts that are on our site uses Sarah as well. And I'm just going to read those two examples. I think they're really, really demonstrative of the difference between telling and showing. So telling first, Sarah was intensely mad at the group of girls and she confronted the queen bee. And then to show, you might say something like, Sarah threw her books down on the sidewalk and whirled around. Clenching her fist, she stalked towards the crowd of girls. The queen bee emerged from the pack and met Sarah's eyes with a look of disdain.
That's perfect. That's great. And the other thing is it's the use of the language as well. So she stalked, and this is another thing that was on my list, so that now I don't have to talk about. I mean, I'll talk about now. Oops, sorry, somebody else will get that. Secretaries will get that. So she stalked towards the girls. This gives such a vivid. Straight away, we know the mood that Sarah's in, how she's feeling, what she's doing, and it's the use of language, deftly used, you know, well used, can make a fantastic difference, and that's a huge part of showing, and that I had here to talk about. Yeah,
in fact,
it's great. They're way ahead of me tonight. It's fantastic.
Well, and someone in chat, I'm not sure who, but has talked about vivid verb usage. If you use vivid verbs, that says a lot about your character.
It does. And that's a very, very good point. What you don't want to do, of course, with all these things is to start piling things up. Verbs, adjectives, you know, you use them. We go back to the catch up from our description session. But for those who weren't here, I said, you know, use description like a condiment. Use it lightly to bring out the flavor of your writing. And it's the same with verbs, adjectives. You want to use them exactly the right amount, so that it brings out the flavor of what you're saying. But yes, it's very valid.
And that's a key point, isn't it? Balance. Because I'm sure that's a common issue. You know, someone gets it or thinks they get it, and then you end up with a manuscript that is completely the reverse. So it's It's strewn everywhere.
Yeah. It's, you know, when we were talking the other day, I used the example, didn't I, of like getting the biting point when you're learning to drive. So if you drive a car with gears, there's always this point where you have to learn how to not stall and get the biting point between the gas and the clutch and everything. So it's like that. You need to find this really careful balance. And that, honestly, some people can just, frankly, some people can just do it. They just can. But all is not lost, because if you can't just do it, writing, as I always say, is a skill. And like any other skill, it can be learned, it can be honed, it can be perfected. And practice. You know, if you've got a, you know, we're back to the other thing I always talk about is the chiming glass, or in this case, the not chiming glass. If you're getting this with a piece of your writing, with a chapter or a paragraph or a scene, and you know it's not quite right, just keep writing it. Just keep writing it.
Yeah.
You'll know the bits that aren't working. And honestly, you will get, if you really persevere and keep writing it, put it away, come back the next day, keep writing it, you will be astonished what a difference just something that simple can make. Writing is always evolving. A person's ability to write, it's always moving, it's organic, it's always evolving.
Yeah. So any tips to know, so this is from Daniela, any tips to know when to tell and when to show in a scene? So is there any techniques or tips, you know, that help define when you should use one or the other?
Well, you have to go, there's two things. One is you need to go to the heart of the scene. What are you saying with this scene? So you've got to bring out the heart of the scene. So if it's, I'm sorry, my mind has gone completely blank, but you know, whatever the heart of the scene is, if it's walking, you know, John's just arrived in India, he's overwhelmed, it's all, you know, that's what you want to bring out. But the other thing, oh my God, I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. What was the question? I'm sorry, everybody.
So it was knowing whether to use showing or telling in a particular scene.
So the other thing is, well, the risk of repeating myself is you've got to hone in on the bits that are important. So what you don't want to do is give us a load of wonderful detail, beautiful detail that's sort of extraneous to what the heart of the scene is. So you need to focus on what you're trying to say and how best to bring the reader into that, what details you use, what words you use, what emotions you use to bring your reader into that moment. And sometimes it's absolutely fine to say he walked through the market.
Yeah.
The other thing that's important to do is it's context is important as well. And we were talking the other day about the battleground. Tom, do you remember?
Yeah.
I was telling Tom this example from a book I worked on many years ago, set in ancient Greece, and there'd just been an absolutely horrendous battle. It was ghastly. There were limbs flying and the crunch of bone, and very well written, actually, and very vivid. And afterwards, one of the characters walked across the battlefield he wanted to meet with somebody on the other side of the battlefield. And I said to the author, I don't think it would be that easy to walk across the battlefield. I think there'd be piles of dead bodies. I think there'd be broken spears sticking up. I think there'd be carrion there, you know, there'd be swarms of flies. Now, what I didn't want him to do was put everything in, but I didn't want him in that context to just say he walked across the battlefield, because it didn't make sense. Sometimes it's perfectly fine to walk across the battlefield. So you've got to think things through. You've got to put yourself there in the scene as well as putting your reader there in the scene. So if there's just been a battle with limbs flying, you've got to put yourself there and think, okay, I'm going to walk across this field now. Actually, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm going to go the long way round. Maybe my character's going to do that as well. So that's That's one of the ways of trying to work it out. And then he can walk along the river.
Yeah,
that's fine. So context is important as well.
And so carrying on the I suppose talking about scenes. So I'm not sure the name of this person. Holger Garden is what they've appeared on in question and answer in the Q&A box. But they've asked, are there ever reasons to use showing or telling for scene entries or exits? For example, telling can be great for the first line of chapter 1 to keep the reader wanting to know more. So I guess it's back to, are there recognized times when you should and shouldn't use it, but specifically around scene entries and exits?
There's no rule at all about something like that. You use it when it's going to work. Yes, beginnings of chapters, beginnings of scenes are very, very good. Coming back to the wet dogs and the cows. But also, if you want to leave a chapter with a dun dun dun, then he suddenly smelt burning paraffin. Dun dun dun.
Yeah.
Or if you're sorry, I did that very badly, didn't I? If you're showing, Joe turned his head. What was that? He could smell paraffin. Then.
Yeah.
So it's how you. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm not a writer. I'm an editor. I'm just making this stuff up as I go. But I hope I'm getting my points across.
You are, and I think there are plenty of examples out there. It's very easy to look up. Well-known examples of the difference between showing and telling. I really like, actually, on this point, I think another thing that Marv first mentioned, someone else has just commented on, is the emotion thesaurus. It's not something I'm familiar with, but it's emotional thesaurus, which lists the physical reactions to different emotions. So that could be really useful, I guess, in helping describe, helping to show rather than tell.
We've talked about this before. Use any help you can get. There's bunches of stuff on the internet. There's word wheels. There are things like this, which I've never heard of, but it sounds great. Use everything. And after a bit, it will become natural. Yeah. After a bit, you will write, the more descriptive word instead of just whatever. It will become more natural. Use it all. It's not cheating.
What about genres, Sal? Someone, sorry, I don't have a name, but they've asked, do these rules, does this apply to memoirs? So any special considerations for writing memoirs?
Well, what's the most famous memoir is Proust, and that all starts with the smell of a Madeleine, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's what starts it off. Yes, of course. And in memoir, it can be extremely vivid if you show rather than tell. And this is where using all the senses does come in, because if you remember something, you very often remember the sound of your mother singing, you remember the smell of your mother's dressing gown, you remember the touch of your child's hair, what your child's hair feels like. So for goodness sake, yes, memoir, go for it, big time. Not big time, measuredly.
Yes, yeah, fantastic. Okay, let's have a quick look. There's still lots of questions I've still to get through. So is there a method to properly combine dialogue and scene description without taking the reader out of the moment?
Yes. And I've never been able to find the right word for this. I call it signifiers. So it's the bits, if you've got a long tract of dialogue, with well-written dialogue, there's always going to be, now again, I'm going to make this up on the spot, so it's not going to be very good, but what are you doing? He said, taking his hat off in surprise. That taking his hat off in surprise, which makes no sense, is a signifier. So I'm not sure. He walked to the window and stared moodily out. Also very bad, but you get the point. In the signifiers in the dialogue, which you need to show us who's talking. You need to show us the mood. You can tell things about the season, the time of day, the light, so many things. Those are the places to get that in the dialogue. And I call it signifiers. And for all I know, that's the actual real name for it. But I've never been able to find. Do tell me if you know the real name.
Yeah. Does anyone know that? Oh, here we go. So someone says I call them beats.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. No problem. What was the other term? What was the other term you used there? Tracks of dialogue or tractor dialogue.
Act. You know when you've got a long, words, and there's no. It's not broken up with anything. There's no he said or yeah, there might be a he said, but there's no she walked to the window and stared out, or there's no. And it's also a good way to remind us of what your characters look like, actually. So you can say, you know, his red hair caught the sun as he struggled to answer, you know, so it's good. Tags we're being told.
Yeah, tags, dialogue tags. I guess they are dialogue tags in a way, aren't they? But I think
I don't know why in 25 years I've never found that. Actually, to tell you the truth, I stopped looking a very long time ago. I did try and find out very early on. Thank you. I think I'll stick with signifiers, but I will tell people they're also called dialogue tags or action tags. So thank you, everybody. Really helpful.
So something else is quite an interesting point. Eduardo mentions that in relation to showing and describing spaces, he's heard Zadie Smith saying that she's less keen to describe places than she would have done years ago, since people can now go and see them on Google. Which is quite an interesting point.
With no disrespect to Zadie, that's like saying, why write a book? I'll just tell the story to a reader and they can write it themselves, surely. Taken out of context, I don't know what she means, and that she may well have been joking or being, you know, making a point. Of course you must describe it to your reader. You don't want the reader to go off and go to Google when they're reading your book. You want them completely absorbed in your writing.
Yeah, good point.
Right.
Amelia's asked, what's a word wheel, Sal? So you've got...
What's a what? A word wheel?
A word wheel, yeah.
You can see, so it'll say something like fear, angst, anxiety, you know, it starts with a sort of root word and then goes out with other examples. If you Google word wheel, there's loads of them out there. And if you're trying to find the word that you want, I know a lot of people who find them very helpful, but it's interesting that a lot of people drop them. They use them for a year or two and then they drop them because they've sort of got it.
Interesting. Okay, now Daryl asked an interesting question, because this is going to lead me on something that I wanted to ask you, Sal. We've talked about before, but he's asked for some suggestions of text or good examples of the art of showing. And my question was more about, okay, so who are the writers? What are the books out there that really do an amazing job of this? And we've mentioned Rebecca before now as being a great example.
We'll always come back to Rebecca, even though, you know, I've told you this story where when I started doing this, I would always guide people to Rebecca, and I would say to them, what did you think? And they would say, well, it's all right, because of course these days the story is highly dubious in so many ways, but the writing is faultless. It's a masterclass in writing a book from one end to the other. It's absolutely wonderful. Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Yeah. An obvious person for me to choose is Sarah Waters.
Yes.
She does it so effortlessly. She does it so effortlessly that you don't even realize that you're right there in the scene.
It sends a shiver up my spine, Sal. I've just finished reading The Paying Guests, as well, you know, and my goodness me, I really did live that whole book in the moment, right in the middle of the action. It was amazing.
But the fact is, people have got different tastes. There's plenty of people here, if they started to read Sarah or read Rebecca, that's confusing. Read a Sarah Waters book or read the book called Rebecca, we would hate them. Everyone will find their writer that speaks to them. What you've got to do, and that will inform the way you write quite lightly. So you choose your favorite book and you study it. And I know that kind of takes the fun out of your favorite book for a little while, but it's amazing what happens when you start to look, the things that will unfold for you.
Yeah.
That's the best way to learn, really.
I'm just going to throw one more in there because you've mentioned to me before, A Town Called Alice.
A Town Called Alice. Well, I mentioned Neville Shute books. He's very old-fashioned now. He wrote during the war and just after the war. Well, indeed, and just before the war. And his books, I always point people who write about World War II. I say read Neville Shute books, because if you want to know exactly how people spoke, exactly how people thought, exactly about the English class system, it's just all there. It's just all there. And he's another effortless writer. It's absolutely perfect. You don't even think about it and you're completely wrapped up in the story. But everyone will find their book, really. That's the thing. Everyone will find their book or their author and think, this is how I want to do it. And then you need to work out how you're going to do it that way.
So there's really interesting comments in chat, and once again, dear listeners, I love the conversations that go on in chat as you all discuss these things among yourselves. But I really like this conversation around tags and beats. And someone pointing out that, you know, they think tags are more related to where you're just saying someone said something. They're part of dialogue, whereas beats is almost splitting up a person's words with a beat in the middle, kind of a description to break up the dialogue. So it's a bit more than just a tag.
It's interesting because when I first started to try and find this out, it was more than 25 years ago. The internet was not what it was now. I possibly just didn't know how to use a search engine very well, or possibly all these websites weren't out there. And you know, as I said, I gave up after a while trying to look. I thought, I'm just going to call them signifiers. I'm only talking to the people that I work with. But you know, the point is that they're very good places to get it in there.
So someone's asked around whether ProWritingAid have any plans to develop a feature in the system that can supply us with an emotional thesaurus. We don't, but I think it's a great idea, and we're constantly talking about new functionality. So I will take that one to the team and see if there's anything we can do there. I really like the idea. I need to explore it more myself because I'm not familiar with it, but it sounds fascinating. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. So how can a writer balance physical and emotional descriptions effectively when introducing a character for the first time? That's from Daniela.
I'm sorry, Tom. Suddenly I'm seeing chat for some reason, which I had turned off. So let me turn it off again.
Okay.
I find it very distracting.
Yeah, no problem.
To everybody, but I just get very involved in reading what you're saying. Right, I've turned it off. Could you repeat the question?
Of course. Daniela says, how can a writer balance physical and emotional descriptions effectively when introducing a character for the first time?
I don't know if I can answer that. I think I think you have, you know, to answer that for you as a writer, I would have to look at your writing and we would have to talk about it. It's a lot about instinct, and it's a lot about, it's this, what all writers can have is they've got an inbuilt bullshit detector, basically. And what a lot of writers do is think nobody else is going to notice. I've noticed this, but nobody else will. But when you read your own writing, there's always this. When you hear that, instead of that cling of the crystal, you know for yourself it's not wrong, it's not right. Trust your own instincts, trust your gut, trust your heart, and trust your brain, actually, because try and read like a reader, not like the writer. That really helps, actually. That is one thing that really helps. Try and imagine your reader coming to it stone cold, and that can throw up some horrifying stuff, actually. It's really appalling. So that is the one piece of advice I would give to that. If you're out, just imagine that you're your own reader and read it that way, and see.
Yeah, and that's something we come back to time and again, isn't it? That it's, you know, there are no hard and fast rules. It really comes down to putting yourself in the reader's shoes.
Yeah.
Bringing them into the scene with you, and something we say again and again.
The most important thing, whatever the topic is, think of your reader. Think of your reader. That is so, I cannot stress how important that is. Think of your reader.
Great. Sal, I mean, we've covered quite a lot. I've still got quite a few questions outstanding, but before we we're 45 minutes in, I want to make sure there's nothing, is there anything specific on the subject that you wanted to highlight or mention or talk about before we kind of move to the last part?
Well, I think a lot of the stuff that I've made notes about, that people have brought up. What about things we talked about the other day? Is there anything that's still outstanding, do you think?
No, I think most of it is, we've covered a lot of it, to be honest, Sal. I think a lot of what we were talking about comes back to that point of there is no this isn't something to be mistaken with, you must do this or you mustn't do that. It's the ketchup test someone else has mentioned in chat, right? The condiment test. So making sure you're sprinkling it throughout, you're not clumping it. But more than anything, it's being able to recognize what showing versus telling is. And really, I cannot recommend enough. And this guy, I'm not a writer, but I've read some fascinating blogs, not only those on our site, but there are many, many blogs on this subject, which give you great examples, and it will come, you will get it. So yeah, I think we've pretty much covered everything there.
Say that I should copyright that ketchup thing.
Yeah.
One day when I'm 95, I'm going to say, I was the person who thought of that. And have I made a penny? No.
Yeah, exactly. We'll have run hundreds of webinars by then. Right, let's, while we're at it, there are a lot of mentions right now for Stephen King's On Writing. I know lots of people highly recommend that book. Looks like you do too, Sal.
I recommend it all the time. Wonderful book. Yeah. But not everyone can get on with it. This is the thing. It's like the rest. You have to find it, but it's so good.
Okay, Sal, there's a question we have to answer here. And forgive me, anonymous attendee, I don't know your name, but the more I learn about the craft, the more ungraspable it seems. These videos teach me as much as they depress me. How do you treat a client who is in a creative emotional crisis? So how do you help them get through those difficult?
The first thing I say is welcome to being a writer.
Yeah.
Writing is horrible, shocking, depressing, distressing agony. And it's worth it for the 10 minutes of the year when it's not. But writing is really hard, really difficult. Anyone who tells you otherwise, you can poke them in the eye and tell them I sent you. It's so hard to do. I have worked with people at all levels of writing ability and success. I have never worked with any authors who haven't said to me, I can't do this anymore. I don't know what I'm going to do. It's terrible. I've been working on it for a week and it just stinks. It is just part of being a writer. Now, I know that doesn't make it feel better, but it's cyclical. You will feel like that and you will feel terrible. Go away, have a walk, watch a film, have a love affair, do something else for a day or a week or a year sometimes. Come back, it'll work. Eventually it'll work. Eventually you'll free up. My advice to people is always, if it's not working, just stop. Now that's contrary to other people's advice. Other people say, push through it, keep trying, keep going. I think that's crazy. This is creativity. You can't force creativity. It's not like training to be an athlete. So if you're having a hard day or a hard week, be forgiving of yourself, be kind to yourself. Know that every single author of every book in every bookshop in the world has gone through what you're going through, and give yourself space and come back to it when the inspiration hits. It will come back, I promise you.
And I love, so again, some things going on in chat here. someone mentioned that Glenn mentioned Danielle Steele makes it look easy, but actually we know, you know more than anyone, Sal, working with, you know, award-winning authors, that everybody has their difficult times. Every writer has their, you know, their difficult times when they find it very hard.
I think really every good writer does. I think there are certain genre writers, and Stephen King, who is an extremely good writer, by the way, might be one of them, who I think once they get into the flow, once they get into the groove of their genre, of their style, probably do find it easier. I guarantee you, even Stephen King will have the days when he kicks the cat and pours, you know, water over his computer and swears he's going to become a postman. I absolutely guarantee it.
Yeah, great. And
I just say, not the cat kicking. That was a joke.
Someone else said Gaiman's advice. Be easy on yourself, which is absolutely right. You know,
yeah.
And the other thing, again, I said, you know, I feel like this session has really developed. We've got a great community here. There are lots of communities out there. I don't think I said that right. Communities. Go and find them. You know, find your group, your reading group, your beta readers, whoever it is. Everybody will have their difficult times to share and talk about, and people love to to share advice. I think we're kind of approaching the end. I'm going to ask one last question because I think Shirl has been asking it and wanted to know, how do we know when to stop showing? How do we avoid being too purple? And I think I know what you're going to say on that, but what's your answer to that?
My answer is write it, get it all down, because you can always cut. And sometimes you only know if you've been too purple when you show it to your readers and they go, yikes. Sometimes it's very difficult to see with your own writing. Sometimes your editor is going to say, this is great, we're going to cut it in half because, you know, you've gone too far, there's too much. And it comes down to murdering your darlings as well. Sometimes there is, you know, it's all wonderful, but you've just got to cut it back. One of the key things about being a writer is try not to write in isolation. That is the hardest thing of all. Get your group around you, get your posse, get your gang, people who can read for you, people who can give their opinions that you trust. That's how all the good writers do it. Everyone's got a reader. Everyone's got behind every great reader, behind every great writer, there's a gang of readers who have given their different opinions sometimes. And then it's you know, up to you to decide which one you go with, which one you choose. I once worked on a book where me and the in-house editor had very different opinions of the ending of the book, and we both stated our case extremely vividly, and then the author just had to go off and just think about what we had both said, and she had to decide. You know, ultimately it's your choice, it's your book, but never ever shut yourself away, never write in isolation. That way does lie madness and kicked cats, really, seriously. Try to open yourself up to ideas and opinions.
Yeah, great. Okay, we're going to wrap up. I just want to say a shout out to Bonnie, who has just said, I started a story 30 years ago and have restarted it and finished it. So that's huge. Congratulations, Bonnie. And there is the story.
Fantastic. Well done.
And someone else asked about whether we have a community group or a kind of forum. We do. So if you go to Facebook and look up ProWritingAid Writers Community, we have, I think, about 5,000 people in that community now, and it's great. It's just like it is here, people helping each other, providing lots of advice. We even have days when you can promote your own work once a week. We have theme sessions on there. There's all sorts. If you are a Facebook user, and I know not everyone is, but do check that out. Yeah, and I think with that, we're going to bring the evening to a close. So Sal, thank you ever so much once again. Delightful to talk, and to all of our wonderful users, listeners out there, thank you for joining us. We love that you stick with us month after month. And we will be returning in December. I can't remember the topic off the top of my head, but the list is on the website. And we will...
I think somebody, for some reason I'm seeing chat again, somebody just said, are we doing historical fiction? And we are, aren't we?
Yes. In fact, that's for Shirley again, isn't it? Yes. Historical fiction in December. So I've got a lot to learn in that one. Thanks, guys. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and we will see you all soon. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
You, everyone. Bye.